Hi everyone. So today we're going to look at another game from FIDEchess.com Online Nations Cup 2020. It is round 8 and Team India is fighting against Team Europe. So there are 4 matches from each round, and by considering 3 of them, Team Europe is leading with 2-1. So in order to equalize, India needs to win this game, the game that is going to be played between Vidit Gujrathi from India and Levon Aronian from Team Europe. So a huge responsibility on the shoulders of Vidit here. However, they actually faced each other back in round 3 because this is a double round robin tournament. And there Vidit lost to Levon Aronian. Levon played a beautiful game of chess. In case you haven't watched that video, then you can find the link in the I button on your top right corner. So here is the second chance Vidit is getting. He is getting an opportunity to equalize, to take his revenge, you can say, or we don't know, Levon can also win this match and maintain his superiority. So without further delay, let us see what happens in the match. Here Vidit is playing with the white pieces and Aronian with the black pieces. And Vidit begins the game with d4. As we all know, he's a d4 player, and Aronian replies with knight f6. We are looking at c4, e6, knight c3 and bishop b4, the Nimzo Indian on the board. And well, the idea is that pinning this knight against the king and weaken white's control over the e4 square, practically preventing white from pushing e4 here. And Vidit here goes for f3, the Kumho variation. And actually Vidit took the same line against Dmitry Andrekin in World Blitz Championship 2019. He is very strong in this line, and he actually won that game against Andrekin. In case you haven't watched that video, then you can find the link, that link also in the I button. However, here Aronian goes for d5, challenging the center, a3, asking black what do you want to do with your bishop, and the game against Andrekin and Dmitry Andrekin actually went for capturing the knight, b into c3 and c5, so losing the bishop pair so early in the game. However, in this game Aronian decides to keep the bishop pair instead of losing them too early. So here just bring the bishop back to e7. And that gives white an opportunity to push e4. So why not? D into e4, f into e4, and now look at this huge control of white over the center. But he lags in development, so here Vidit needs to go for some rapid development. However, Aronian here goes for c5, directly challenging the center. d5, ed, and castles by black. Now as white is here lagging in development, so bishop e2, also creating some room for the king to castle, rook e8 taking control of this open file, and knight f3 developing the knight here. Bishop g4, and white simply castles in this position, knight bd7, now preparing to bring this rook, also activating this knight here. So white here goes for d6, attacking this bishop, bishop f8 the only option, and h3. Levon, as usual, he is deciding to keep the bishop pair for now, so bishop h5. Now knight b5, preparing to fork these two rooks by bringing it to the c7 square, so rook b7. And look, if this knight now comes on this c7 square, this is a very good outpost for white, because black's pieces are looking really weak here. This rook, this bishop, even the queen are not active, and after this knight comes to c7, it's gonna be really annoying for black. So black will try to break that outpost. However, white goes for bishop f4, activating the bishop, also some kind of possibility of a nasty discovery in future after moving this pawn here. So a6 by black, and knight c7, attacking the rook, also putting an outpost over black's territory. So black will try to break it somehow. So rook e4 first, attacking the bishop, bishop g3. Now black can go for capturing this pawn, but that will give white a huge advantage, because look at white's pieces here, they are very much active. This bishop pair, this knight, this outpost, black's pieces will be paralyzed in this position if white somehow tries to capture this pawn. Obviously it's defended by the bishop, but I'm saying after bishop captures, then rook into c4. So here the best move for black is to go for rook d4, attacking the queen at the same time the pawn and breaking the outpost here, but obviously this knight is controlling the d4 square, so Aronian first go for bishop into f3, bishop into f3 and rook d4. Now double attacking this pawn at the same time with a fork on the pawn and the queen here. Queen e1 and then bishop into d6, now breaking the outpost. This knight is under attack, so obviously knight d5. This bishop is pinned against the rook, so bishop into g3 is kind of forced. Rook in queen into g3 and king h8, moving the king out of any danger, any possible threats. Rook a d1 with the idea of captures and creating an isolated pawn of black here, and queen f8. A better move could have been knight into d5, but here Aronian goes for queen f8, maybe with the possibility of after rook captures rook, pawn captures rook, then activating the queen here. Now Vidit moves his pieces according to his plan. He is planning for creating an isolated pawn for of black and also expanding on the queen side. So rook into d4, c into d4 and immediately b4 expanding on the queen side. Knight into d5, bishop into d5 and then knight f6 attacking the bishop. Queen e5 because black has this isolated pawn, so preparing to capture this pawn. Knight into d5, c into d5, f6 attacking the queen, and now queen into d4, now equalizing and also creating a passed pawn for white here. So rook d8 preparing to bring the queen to d6 and creating a battery here. White goes for rook e1, taking control of this open file. h6 and rook e6, now bringing the queen bringing the rook into the game. Queen f7, queen e4, now creating a battery here, and black goes for queen c7 with the idea of queen c1 check and forking the king and the pawn here. So white needs to defend the pawn, so a4 by white. King g8, rook e7 attacking the queen. Queen b6 check first, so king h1 and then queen d6, putting pressure on this pawn here. Vidit simply goes for a5 here because black actually cannot capture this pawn. Suppose queen into d5 happens, then rook e8 check is deadly. Rook cannot capture because this queen is hanging, so obviously black will lose the queen. So if black tries to defend the king by king f7, then queen e7 check, king g6, and black is losing the rook here. So black cannot actually capture this pawn, so instead black goes for f5, queen e6 check, now forcing black to exchange the queens. Queen into e6, d into e6 and rook d1 check, so king h2 the only option, and rook e1 putting pressure on this e6 pawn. So king g3 bringing the king into the game, rook e4 preparing to capture this b pawn, so rook b6 now with the intention of creating passers on queen side. Rook into e6 and king f4, now threatening to capture this pawn here. g6 and king f3. King f8 bringing his king into the game. Rook b6, now if obviously black captures, then pawn captures and it's simply impossible. This king is far away, so this pawn is gonna be queened really soon. So black goes for rook e4 first. Rook into a6, rook into b4, but rook into g6 now. White is now up a pawn and also a passer on the queen side here. Rook b5 and a6, h5, king f4, activating the king obviously. King f7, now rook c6 here. So h4 and king g5, now these pawns are hanging, so white is gonna capture them really soon. Rook b2, now attacking this g pawn, so king into f5. Now black cannot go for rook into g2 here because rook c7 check is immediately winning. Here king cannot come forward, so king e8 is forcing and white can simply go for a7 here. And now black cannot prevent this pawn from queening. Suppose black goes for some last checks here. So say rook f2 check, king g5, rook g2 check, and king into h4. No further checks are possible. So say rook a2, but simply rook c8 is simply winning, and whatever black does here, king f7 say, now white is gonna get his queen back, and now rook captures, and now it's winning for white here. So instead of capturing this pawn, black first goes for rook f2 check, king g4, rook into g2 check, and king into h4. Now as I have told, no further checks are possible. So rook g1, king h5, rook g3 attacking the pawn, so h4, and king g7. Now this king and this pawn are paralyzed. So rook c7 check. Again, black cannot, king cannot go backward, because then again a7, and now it's again not possible for black to prevent this pawn from queening. Whatever he does, white is gonna get his queen back, and after captures, it's winning for white. So king f6, a7, and now rook a3 here. Now white's motive is to bring the king closer to the situation and simply get his queen back. So white goes according to his plan. King g4 now, rook a4 check, king f3, king g6 now, king e3, king h5, king d3, rook a1, king d4, king into h4, and king c5, king g5, and king b6, king f6, and simply king b7 here. So now black goes for rook b1 check, and white simply plays king c8, and it is in this position on move 66. Levon Aronian resigned, and Vidit won this game, because now it's simply not possible for black to prevent this pawn from queening, and it's winning for white here. Suppose black goes for rook a1, then simply queen b8, rook b1 check, and then rook b7. Now if obviously black captures, then white is gonna get his queen back. If suppose rook a1, then a8 equals queen, and now whatever black does, it's winning for white. So it is on move 66. Vidit won this game, successfully taking his revenge, and also equalizing for Team India. And with this, we are coming to the end of the video. Obviously, in conclusion, I think that the people who are really a fan of Nimzo Indian, f3 is something, a variation which needs to be considered seriously. Vidit is very strong in this, and so with this, we are coming to the end of the video, and also end of the game. I'm taking your leave. See you next time with some other exciting video.